Let me take a moment, if I can, and introduce our first speaker tonight. Michael Medved's nationally syndicated radio talk show reaches some 300 stations across the country with an audience of more than 4 million, placing him at nearly 2 decades on Talkers Magazine list of the top 10 political talk shows in America today. Born in Philadelphia and raised in Southern California, Michael majored in American history and graduated with honors before attending Yale Law School, where his classmates included none other than Bill and Hillary Clinton. After several years as a campaign speechwriter and political consultant, Michael wrote his first bestseller at the age of 26 and has gone on to write another 12 best-selling books, including Hollywood versus America, The 10 Biggest Lies About America, and his most recent best-selling book, The American Miracle, Divine Providence in the Rise of the Republic. Books, by the way, are available here at the table if you want to pick one up on your way out, and Michael will linger for a few minutes and sign autographs as well. Michael's columns on politics and media appear regularly in the Wall Street Journal and USA Today. In addition to his writing and daily talk show, Michael is also a respected film critic, featured first on CNN. You don't really tell people that, do you? And later, PBS, of course, from 85 to 96, where he served as co-host of the popular weekly show Sneak Previews. He's also chief film critic of the New York Post for 5 years before launching his daily radio show back in 1996. Tonight, Michael's going to spend some time explaining why the media pushes polarized politics, creating hostility and driving Americans further apart. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a nice Bay Area welcome to author, columnist, and talk show host, Mr. Michael Medved.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's wonderful to be here, and particularly at a patriotic location like this one. I understand this is the Portuguese Hall, right? And do people know, this is just a little tidbit, and it's extra, no charge, the most famous of all Portuguese Americans? Anyone know? John Philip Sousa. Stars and Stripes forever. So it is a patriotic hall, but John Philip Sousa did not want to be a hyphenated American of any kind. He was just an all-American and became famous as conductor of the president's own Marine Band. And God bless him for his contributions. I wanted to speak very briefly about this idea of polarized politics. I mean, it's become a mantra everywhere. All you hear everywhere you go is our politics is more polarized than ever before. Liberals and conservatives have such a distance between them. I recently spoke, actually last Thursday night. I was in St. Louis, and I was speaking at an educational policy conference. And the subject of the educational policy conference was winning the second Civil War. And the premise was that we're in the midst of some kind of civil war. So I asked people who were there, I objected to the title of the conference, because I would ask people who believe that we're in a civil war, what exactly is the war about? Really, what are the issues? The first Civil War, I mean, it had a pretty fundamental issue. Slavery was a key moral issue. It was utterly irreconcilable. Slavery either would be preserved, or if Lincoln was right, Lincoln said if slavery isn't wrong, nothing is wrong. And he was right. Today, arguments about whether we're going to cut corporate taxes from 35% to 30% or to 21%. I mean, even Obama was in favor of cutting corporate taxes. And Obama was no conservative. I don't think I have to remind you. So really, what are the issues in this second Civil War? And I have not been able to hear the President's State of the Union address tonight. But I think from what I was able to hear, I mean, part of what I saw in there on television was remarkable footage of Bernie Sanders applauding President Trump. Now, it wasn't the end of the speech. President Trump wasn't saying, God bless America, so I'm not sure Bernie Sanders would have applauded that, but maybe. So, really, President Trump was speaking about stuff that Americans agree on. And it's a question of really this polarization that we face is frankly a media invention. And yes, politicians have done some of it too. But if you look at the reality, right now, the issue of health care, are there really any conservatives who want to totally dismantle the government's role in health care and throw grandma out on the street into the snow and dismantle Medicare and, like the ad shows, such a Paul Ryan pushing grandma off the cliff? Are there really liberals who want to outlaw private medicine and have us go into full socialized medicine? The answer is there are not. We're arguing about details, and you know what it's like? It's like the point that people make. There's a famous play, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, where there's a line, right? And they what's so mean about academic politics? Why are academic politics so poisonous and so divisive? It's because it means so little. It's so inconsequential. And frankly, the differences between Republicans and Democrats have not been huge. Really, they have not. So why is it that people assume that they are? Even during the 1960s, which some of you might be old enough to remember, I spent part of the time in the backwash of the 60s, in the 1970s, early 70s, living in the Bay Area. I mean, and it was pretty wild and it was pretty strange. But at least at that time, what people were arguing about was America's role in the world. It was the Vietnam War, and it was the draft, and yes, it was the civil rights, and there were urban riots, and there were serious issues, big issues. I do not see issues like that today. And by the way, the Republicans actually did something that I think is very commendable, is they just put forward a bill that is eminently worth defending. And I don't care whether you consider yourself pro-life or not, but it was a bill to protect babies past the 20th week, right? So babies who are 5 months old. And by the way, with exceptions for the health of the mother, for rape, and for incest, right? And for Democrats, there were only 3 Democrats who crossed party lines to support this bill. It got 51 votes, so it got a majority of the Senate. But honestly, if something that moderate, that basically doesn't interfere with anyone's, quote, right to abortion for the first 5 months of pregnancy, for the first 20 weeks, but basically only protects babies when they're fully capable of feeling pain. A baby at 20 weeks, according to medical science, can recognize voices. It's not just a thing. It's not just a massive tissue. And this idea that this is what we're talking about, it's not life and death. It's not extremes. Right now, we are playing in the middle of the field. And we have been for a long time. So why do we get all this crap, right? Do you remember the line about President Trump, the most radical right-wing president we've ever had? For goodness sake, President Trump was the one who ran for president saying he wasn't going to touch Social Security. Paul Ryan's more radical than President Trump, for goodness sake. And Paul Ryan's not a radical. If you look at President Trump on the issues, leave aside his personality. President Trump has a radical personality. He's a very energetic and polarizing person. But in terms of the issues and the agenda that he has advanced, it's not outside the American mainstream. And the same way they are attacking President Trump, he's the most right-wing president we've ever had. Do you remember they said the same things about George W. Bush when he was president? Constantly indicted the most right-wing president we ever had. And by the way, let me tell you something else, because it was our fault. We constantly attacked President Obama as the most left-wing president we ever had. It's nonsense. We had Franklin D. Roosevelt as president. Franklin D. Roosevelt was a real left-winger. who wanted government to do everything for you, and who greatly increased the size of government. I mean, the entire desire to make everything radical and extreme and polarized is driven by three factors. And one has to do with the nature of media themselves. Number two has to do with the nature of politicians and their use of the media. And number three has to do with a dirty little secret I need to tell you about the American electorate. Let me do all of them very quickly. Point one, the nature of media themselves. One of the things that I've learned after years and years of working in the media business, we don't have a news business in America. We have a bad news business, right? I mean, every day there are literally tens of thousands, no, hundreds of thousands of planes that land safely. Sometimes they even land ahead of time. Do you ever hear about it? Of course not. But if, God forbid, there is a terrible accident and people die, you hear all about it for days. Even though that is more rare than ever before, we have had the safest years in all of aviation history the last several years, and it's getting better all the time. When things go wrong, it's big news. When things go right, nobody seems to care. They highlight, you know, the line that they use all the time for local news is, if it bleeds, it leads. Let's show a weather disaster. We never hear about the weather when it's beautiful like today. But if there are storms, if there are fires, if there are tornadoes, it's compelling, it's dramatic, it can grab eyeballs, it can grab people's attention. And it can make the front pages of the paper. That's why, do you know we have had 3 presidents in a row, 3 in a row, who have regularly been stigmatized. This is the worst president in American history. Remember people said that about President Bush? A lot of them. And now if you look at President Bush, he's already rising in historical estimation. And of course, there were lots of people on our side who said Obama is the worst president of American history. I'm not an Obama fan. I'm not an Obama defender. But you know, a country that has had Franklin Pierce and Millard Fillmore and Andrew Johnson and Jimmy Carter in the Oval Office really should not exaggerate. President Obama was prevented from being the worst president in American history by John Boehner taking over the House of Representatives, really. Okay, so what is going on here? What's going on here is the nature of news media to broadcast and amplify and greatly exaggerate bad news all the time. Everything is a crisis. Everything you ever see on CNN, it's a crisis. It's the crisis of civility. It's the crisis of confidence. It's a crisis in education. It's a crisis in medical care. You know what? Things aren't that bad in America. And for goodness sake, it is very important for conservatives of all people to recognize that, yes, we had a lousy day in the market today, but you know, tomorrow, God willing, will be better. And let me tell you, as someone, I mean, for those of you who listen to the show regularly, I was diagnosed with stage 3 throat cancer in December of 2014. And I was determined to continue to broadcast, which didn't work out. I had to take about 3 months off, 11 weeks off from doing the radio show. And, you know, my new book is called The American Miracle. It's not about being sick. But being sick helped me appreciate the American miracle with all of the shortcomings in our medical care system, and particularly the way it's financed and organized. I had miraculously good medical care. And I am very sure I'm not the only one in this room who's had that experience. Are there other people here who have been blessed by the greatest healthcare system in the world right here in America? Okay. That's one example. But this difficulty with polarized politics, is our political system flawless and perfect and wonderful? No, it has problems. But for goodness sake, compare it to the rest of the world. Churchill's line, American democracy is the worst system of government ever devised, except for all those other systems of government people have tried from time to time. You know, this country functions. And this idea of polarization and constant crisis we have to put behind us. That's the nature of media. And I said then the nature of politicians contribute to this air of polarization. You know, right now, the toughest thing for anyone in American politics is getting some attention. And one of the things that politicians are desperate to do, unless you are incredibly independently wealthy, unless you're Tom Steyer, but you know what? Tom Steyer is desperate to get attention. He's willing to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on it. He's the guy, he's your local guy right here in the Bay Area, who has invested, what is he committed now? It's a total, I think, of $100 million, I'm not kidding, to try to impeach President Trump. Now, he knows President Trump is not going to be impeached, nor should President Trump be impeached. It's ridiculous. It's foolishness. But right now, Emmett Terrell of American Spectator talks about the culture smog. I mean, even though the smog has gotten better, one of the many things that's gotten better in American life has been the environment. There's less smog in the San Francisco Bay Area. There's even less smog in Smell A than there has been 50 years ago. Do you know that there are more trees in the United States? Honest to God, there are more trees standing in the United States today than were here in this country in 1950, right? Because partially that's because we produce more food than ever before on less and less farmland. But that's another story. The point about this is that in order to get attention, people stake out positions or do stunts that look outrageous. Everyone is afraid of someone running to your right or running to your left in a primary. And the script seems to be that the only way that you can raise money is by posing as someone very extreme and very far to the left. I mean, the success of the Bernie Sanders campaign, it's scary, frankly. Now, he could never have been elected president, but the fact that he came this close to winning the Democratic primaries, it's just extraordinary. And this is the problem, is politicians who will do anything to cut through the clutter, to get attention, to try to raise money, to try to get on TV. By the way, President Trump was brilliant at this. Did you ever notice that President Trump was the only candidate in all of American history who would have his rally speeches covered live from beginning to end? They would cover every moment of a Trump speech. And it's estimated that he got the equivalent of $72 billion. Could that even be true? Yes. $72 billion in free airtime by giving dramatic rally speeches. And they were thrilled to do it. You know why? Because it got ratings. People would tune into a Trump speech. I mean, you know, I was very impressed with Carly Fiorina. I liked her campaign. Would anybody tune in for an hour to a Carly Fiorina speech? You know, for a Ben Carson speech? I mean, Ben's a great guy. I just saw him in Washington, D.C., and I think he's doing an outstanding job as our Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. We shouldn't have a Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. There's Ben Sanders is there. Ben Carson is there. But the point about this is if you were broadcasting an entire Ben Carson rally speech, you wouldn't want to operate heavy equipment while doing it. Okay, the point is the nature of mass media emphasizes bad news and excitement and horror. They do treat President Trump like a monster. They treat him like it's Godzilla coming to smash America, destroy all the little people. I mean, really, and horror films do great box office. I mean, It was one of the big box office hits of last year about a killer clown who lives in the sewer and drags, and come on, really. And so the nature of the media themselves emphasize this negativity and the polarization and the edginess. The nature of politics, where everyone is desperate to get some attention and to get some support and very afraid of someone outflanking someone to the right or to the left. And then that brings me to the nature of the American electorate. The people who are the subject of all this attention. And I'm going to tell you a dirty little secret. And I want the people from AM 860, from The Answer, please close your ears to this, because this is something that you shouldn't hear. No one in radio should hear this. But it's the truth. All right, I'm kidding. You don't have to close your ears. But first of all, we are very proud, and I know I speak for my friend Mike Gallagher as well. We're so proud to be on this great station and this beacon of courageous truth-telling here in the Bay Area. It's a wonderful thing to be in this station and this lineup. But here's the dirty little secret about the electorate. Here's the dirty little secret about the American audience. Here's the dirty little secret about the populace at large. I love America. I love the American people. Most Americans, and when I say most, I mean more than 2/3, really don't care about politics. You've seen all the lie witness news stuff. I mean, they had one recently where they asked people yesterday how they responded to Trump's State of the Union address. And they hated it. They hadn't even heard it yet. Do you know they took a poll at the very end of the Obama administration? 28% of the American people didn't know the Vice President of the United States. Now, it's worse than that. It's worse than that. It's about half of that 28% thought they knew and got it wrong. So one of the people in the poll said Colin Powell was the Vice President. You know, now, not that Joe Biden is the most memorable person in the world, but really, the Vice President of the United States. You know that the majority of Americans cannot name even one justice of the Supreme Court? Not even one? Not even one? I mean, it's an appalling lack of interest in politics. And here's the dirty little secret as that applies to talk radio. Somebody who has a tremendously successful radio talk show, political talk show, like Mike and myself, or let's use even a more prominent example, the great Rush Limbaugh, right? Do you know what percentage of the available audience Rush gets typically? And he has really fantastic ratings. They're considered, and he can make millions and millions of dollars. You know what percentage? It's about 5%, 6% maximum. If you are getting a 6% share of the available audience, you're killing it in radio because there's so many radio stations. But what does that mean? That means you are preaching to a very selective choir, and that lends itself to the polarization, because the people who really care about politics, who will tune into a political talk show, the people who will watch MSNBC, heaven forbid, or who will watch Fox News, or who will watch CNN even for that matter, are the people who are true believers, who are into this stuff. People who know who Andrew McCabe is, who know all about the torrid romance between Lisa Page and Peter Strzok. I am so bored with those people. You know, but the point about this is most Americans are busy. They're trying to raise families. They're trying to live their lives. And this air of polarization that this is the worst president we ever had, you know what it's like? It's all self-serving. It's all self-serving. You have to tune in. There's one radio talk show host. I don't want to mention any names. He is not on AM 860. But who has been saying for 20 years, America can't last another year. This is the end. This is the end of our country. This is the worst thing that's ever been in America, the worst polarization, the worst dysfunction, the worst government, the worst. It's nonsense. One of the reasons I wrote this book, The American Miracle, is what this country needs right now is gratitude, not guilt. And we have a very big problem. Because you look around the world and you look at how privileged America is and how well we are doing and really the beautiful opportunities that we all have, that we're able to give our children and grandchildren. I'm very proud of our one-year-old baby granddaughter, our first. Julia Rose Medved, born to my 25-year-old son, Danny, when he was 24. She is an amazing child. She clearly, now this is no exaggeration, clearly she's the greatest baby ever born for 2,000 years. In any event, look, the point about this is we have so much good fortune. The left chooses to explain the good fortune. America's guilty. We are guilty of genocide against Native Americans. We've exploited African labor. We have despoiled the environment. I played today on the air this moronic rant by Michael Moore. And yes, the portly provocateur, as he is known. Michael Moore saying we have to do atonement for our 3 original sins. And the original sins were genocide against Native Americans, the enslavement of African people, and racism against black people. And the 3rd original sin was the suppression of women for 300 years. Only 300 years? Really? I mean, but the point about this is America is such a phenomenon, such an amazing development in the world. One of the things, I quote a professor at University of Pennsylvania, Walter McDougall, who's a great writer and a great guy, who says clearly the most influential development in the last 500 years is the rise of the United States. It's changed everything in the whole world. No one saw it coming. So you either explain it by guilt or by understanding that there is a hidden hand behind it. The only other alternative is it's a series of happy accidents. But you know what? A pattern of happy accidents is still a pattern, and that's evidence of intelligent design, not random evolution, okay? So recognizing that there is a hidden hand, what George Washington in his first inaugural address called the invisible hand that has always favored our endeavors. That doesn't give us special privileges. It imposes special responsibilities. And some of those responsibilities for Americans are telling the truth without fear, without exaggeration, without overhyping the dramatic crisis-ridden division and polarization, and trying to remind people that we should live up to the responsibilities that we have as the instruments of providence, as the instruments of fate, as the instruments of uplifting all of humanity. Pope Pius XII said at the end of World War II, he said it in 1949, that God Almighty has selected the United States of America to raise up suffering humanity. And how the world suffered during that war. May we be worthy of that responsibility, and may we feel thankful and grateful rather than guilty and self-pitying, and be worthy of the obligations and opportunities in this greatest nation on God's green earth.
All right, you ready for more? You're in for another treat. Mike Gallagher is with us tonight. This marks, by the way, his 20th year in network radio. Prior to making that leap in network radio, in 1998, he hosted the morning show on WABC radio back in New York. Today, Talkers Magazine reports that his show was heard by more than 7 million weekly listeners. He, too, is a best-selling author, having written 2 books, Surrounded by Idiots. Wait till you hear the sub. Fighting Liberal Lunacy in America. And 50 Things That Liberals Love to Hate, a humorous, insightful romp about the many things that liberals, as we all know in the Bay Area, seem to love to hate. Mr. Gallagher has also appeared on stage and is a film actor and with featured roles in regional theater and on Broadway. One of Mike's greatest passions, I'll mention, is supporting our law enforcement community. His charitable foundation, Gallagher's Army Fallen Officers Fund, provides assistance to the families of police officers killed in the line of duty. In April of 2015, he was awarded by the New York City Sergeants Benevolent Association their esteemed Heroism Award for his support for law enforcement. The happy conservative warrior, not to be confused with former New York Governor Al Smith, is one of the country's most consistently popular conservative radio talk show hosts. Tonight offers us a look at the epic disconnect that led to the presidency of Donald Trump in what some consider to be the most shocking election in America's history. Ladies and gentlemen, a nice Bay Area warm of applause to speaker, author, and talk show host, Mr. Mike Gallagher.
Thanks, Craig. Thank you very much. That's a nice, warm, important introduction. Makes me feel pretty important. Makes me feel a little bit like a big shot. Now that I'm up here, maybe I better tell you just how important I really am. About a week or so ago, I was giving a speech before a group of distinguished people, not unlike this group. We were having dinner before the speech, and the waiter came by, and I asked if I could have another pat of butter for my baked potato. And the waiter looked at me and said, I'm really sorry, sir. We're only allowed to give one pat of butter per customer. I said, listen, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I'm not really sure you recognize who you're talking to. I said, I'm a nationally syndicated radio host and heard all over the country, millions of people who listen to the show. I've been in the White House 6 times in the Oval Office with presidents. I've been a Fox News contributor for many, many years. I've been on Broadway. And now I've been invited to be the featured speaker in this room full of distinguished people. And the waiter took a look at me and he said, I appreciate that all, sir, but he said, I don't know that you know who I am. I said, no, not really, I don't. He said, I'm the guy who's in charge of the butter. Sort of humbles you a little bit. Makes you realize none of us are any more important than anybody else. We all have a job to do, and we're just trying to survive. It is astounding to be here tonight because I feel a kinship as a resident of New York City, and I live just west of Times Square in Midtown Manhattan. It's not unlike being here. You know, I feel like I'm sort of in that belly of the beast. So let me share with you what election night was like in Midtown Manhattan. Because it was a lot of fun. See, my apartment building is just a couple of blocks from the Javits Center, where Hillary Clinton was going to have her celebration. She was going to have her celebration there because, of course, it had the glass ceiling and all of that. And she was going to break through the glass ceiling and yada, yada, yada. And in Manhattan, it was interesting. In New York City media, there was a little-known observation 3 days before the election. Some of you might be aware of this. But of course, as part of her victory celebration on the Hudson River, she was going to have a huge fireworks display, massive fireworks display. And of course, to have a fireworks display in New York City, you got to have permits and you got to have all the right documentation. Well, 3 days before the election, in a little noticed move, the Hillary Clinton campaign canceled the fireworks. And it was a little blurb in the New York Post. And of course, as a Manhattanite now, I remember reading that in the Post thinking, oh, no, this can't be. This just can't be. And it was a precursor, of course, of things to come. You see, when Donald Trump became the nominee for the Republican presidential process, we all had to make a calculation. Some of us didn't really want to go all in for this guy. Others of us decided there's no way we could really abide by 8 years of Hillary Rodham Clinton. We just knew it. And so I was a host who unwaveringly supported Donald J. Trump from the beginning, from the outset. And it wasn't easy because I have some very, very, very smart colleagues who weren't on board and didn't understand it and fought hard. And it was tough because, you know, I could relitigate the binary choice and all of that, but I knew in my heart as a radio host with responsibility, I got to fight. Got to fight for conservatism, and this is our option. There's no plan C. There's no, option 4. This is it. And so I was all in. And I was in because of an issue that Michael so eloquently touched upon. For me, everything begins and ends with the sanctity of life. With life. Life matters. And we had one candidate who fought against the pro-life movement. We know that. We had another candidate who, I guess, was dragged finally into the pro-life movement, but that's okay with me. Better late than never. And for a president who stood for the sanctity of life, for the Second Amendment, for the support of law enforcement, for all the things that we know now, it was a no-brainer for me. And so it was fun for me on election night to be in my apartment building. I live in this, typical Midtown Manhattan high-rise. And I'm watching like everybody else with my mouth hanging open, 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning. And I knew she was in trouble when they set out Podesta. And Podesta it was like a little bit like the Wizard of Oz, go home here, there's nothing to see here. Go home, cowardly lion. He gave that infamous speech where he said, well, they're still sort of counting the votes, and I want you to go. I was like, oh my gosh. He pulled it off. He pulled off the most shocking victory in the history of America. There's never been anything like this, let's face it. We've never seen anything like it before. And I'm up on the 47th floor of my building kind of looking out, and I'm seeing the stragglers kind of march out from the Javits Center. And I don't take really that much delight in the misery of others, but I had my dog, and I thought, I got to see this. So I went down to 42nd Street with my little puggle. And of course, I'm looking around thinking, please, dear Lord, don't let anybody know me from Fox News. And it was a motley crew. These poor folks, they had the I'm with her sign, the banners, they were all streams and the tears and all that. And I thought, boy, if they only knew who's watching them right now. So it was a remarkable night. And then I decided to take a jaunt up to 48th Street and 6th Avenue, the Fox News Channel headquarters, where there were literally, not unlike a room like this, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. They just couldn't believe it. And high-fiving each other, and the sense of optimism and hope that this is going to, we know, and we knew what we were getting into, because if there's ever been a bull in a china shop, it's this guy. It's this guy. I talk about it every day, that there's no question that this is a fighter, that this is a bull in the china shop. But, tonight he held his State of the Union, and I can't wait to get back to the hotel, and we're going to all, Michael and I, we're going to watch, the State of the Union and see how it was received. I want to take a moment to talk about the State of the Union as I see it, because the state of our union can be described in a lot of ways. It is polarized. Shouldn't be so, but it is. We're at each other's throats in a very personal way. Social media has made it a little dangerous, scary, visceral, nasty, mean, horrific in many ways. So it's divisive. State of our union is divisive. State of our union is angry. People are upset. There's a constant anger, whether we like it or not. We can't wish it away. There is a tension. There's an angst. There is an anger that we all feel. We're weary. We're tired. We talk about the news media saturation. This isn't a garden hose. This is a fire hose. And we get it constantly. And we're in this business. Michael and I spend hours and hours of our lives going through all of this and trying to absorb it. But man, we're just getting hosed down with that fire hose. So are we? And we're not alone. And of course, the media obsession. The media obsession is extraordinary. Again, just like we've never seen a president like this, we've never seen media coverage like this, ever. Jim Rutenberg, who writes for the media in the New York Times, wrote in October before the election, the New York Times, all the news that's fit to print, the old gray lady, said we can't be objective about Donald Trump. And he basically wrote in a column, front page, I'll never forget it, it was a Saturday morning, you can look it up. We have to forego objectivity because he's got to be stopped. He's got to be stopped. That was the New York Times. Now, juxtapose that with today, where angry liberals are livid at the New York Times. In fact, one prominent columnist this week, a writer, said that the New York Times is now officially a white supremacist paper. Swear. It's true. You can look it up. You can Google it. It's true. And what are they mad about? Well, about a week or so ago, the Times had the temerity to devote a whole day, one whole page of letters to the editor from, brace yourself, Trump supporters. Now, yeah, you're right. And liberals, their heads, I'm not kidding you, didn't figure it to, they literally exploded. Because the Times isn't supposed to do that. They're supposed to stop him. They're supposed to stop Americans who think the way he does. They're supposed to stop the mouth-breathing, gun-grabbing, Bible-toting Americans who favor conservatism. And so, you know, it's not unlike watching those sad Hillary supporters on election night in Manhattan. It's kind of enjoyable to watch liberals feast on liberals right now. They don't know what to do. They are going crazy. And they're angry, and Michael talked about watching the State of the Union, and Michael had the Bernie Sanders moment. My favorite moment in the short time we got to watch was Trump making a very, very, American-like pledge about getting unified and coming together as Americans, and he said something that drew applause, and they showed a close-up of Nancy Pelosi. And I'm not kidding you, she looked constipated. She looked angry. She looked tortured. And it was like, oh, it feels good to watch that and see that face. That face. I've gotten in trouble a few times for some of the things I've said, as you might imagine. And a few years ago, I got a little bit of hot water on Fox News because I said something about Nancy Pelosi, saying, I wonder what would happen if there was a bucket of water near her. I wonder what, and I got in all kinds of trouble. I got in a little trouble. I went a little too far. But this is not a happy lady. This is not a happy lady. This is an angry lady. They're angry. These folks can't still get over the election of 2016. They just can't get over it. So I believe that the state of our union is a few things. It's optimistic. We do, as Michael alludes to, and there's not a sunnier optimist in the world more than Michael Medved. Michael talks about optimism and hope. We're relieved because we are going to be in for a wild ride, but we're in for a ride that has seen enormous success in the first year. Success that has led to quite the reckoning, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. We are grateful. The state of our union is gratitude, as again, Michael said, but we're also grateful. I'm grateful when I get out my Wells Fargo app on my smartphone and look at my 401k. I'm grateful that thousands and thousands of Americans are getting those crumbs that Nancy Pelosi referred to. Crumbs. And by the way, can we stipulate that Nancy Pelosi calling $1,000 bonuses pathetic crumbs will haunt the Democrats the way Hillary Clinton's unfortunate choice of the word deplorables haunted her? It's amazing. Crumbs. Can you imagine? I took one day worth of phone calls from listeners who work at the Home Depot and work at the bank and and they told me that, Mike, I got $1,000 bonus from my company. Can you believe it? Can you believe this economy? And Mrs. Pelosi had the audacity to insult those people the way Democrats often do by calling them crumbs. And not just crumbs, it's pathetic, she said, the way those crumbs are being doled out. And finally, our State of the Union, I think, is one of determination. We are determined as Americans. We're determined to fight for what we believe in. It's not easy. It's tough. You talk about being a conservative in a land of liberalism. I've seen numerous news reports in New York City of people just like this young man in the front row who has a red Trump hat on, literally getting physically beat up on the subway for having a red Trump hat on, for having a MAGA hat on, and physically assaulted. You guys know all about Antifa. You know it here. It's awful. These are violent, awful, dreadful people. This isn't civility. There's no discourse. It's their way or the highway, and a terrible penchant for violence. By the way, quick note about the red MAGA hat. And Michael and I, of course, had our share of disagreements during the campaign. And it's not a secret if you listen to 860 AM, The Answer, that, if there's a Trump train, I'm probably the choo-choo Charlie in the front of it. Michael, not exactly on the train, but has has given credit where credit is due. Last year during the campaign, we made a bunch of stops around the country. And one of the stops, I'm doing my Trump stuff, and Michael, of course, not necessarily, but I presented Michael with a gift. In typical Gallagher melodrama fashion, I presented Michael with a MAGA hat of his own. Gave him a red hat, and he could have done one of two things. He could have pulled, you remember the famous story of John Kennedy where he was presented a hat, that awful weekend in Texas, but he didn't want to wear it because John Kennedy never wore hats, so he took a cowboy, it was a cowboy hat. And the historians remembered that. So Michael could have done that, could have said, oh, I don't wear hats. Michael Medved did this class act. And again, we did not agree. We didn't. It's not a secret. It's not a mystery. Michael promptly took that red MAGA hat, and of all people, Michael put it on. Michael wore it, and I was so proud of him. I was so impressed. I was so grateful, and because that's a class act. He's a class act, and he's a good sport. And has been fair, and certainly in the last few months, as so many people have been fair and have had this sort of reckoning that this guy is not going to destroy the economy like they said he was. This guy is not going to abandon the Second Amendment like they said he was. This guy is not going to turn far left and all of a sudden initiate liberal. Remember, we heard all that, remember? We heard that, frankly, from a number of Republicans who hate this guy, and many of them still do. Unlike my colleague and friend Michael Medved, there are writers, one in particular, I don't want to mention her name because my blood pressure goes up, but she writes a blog for the Washington Post, and she literally is on record as reversing her own prior positions on issues just so she doesn't have to agree with President Trump. I mean, it's incredible to watch the way people are twisting themselves into pretzels to oppose him to this day. I get it from the left. I don't always get it from fellow conservatives. I don't quite understand it. I also don't understand the part of this, and Michael talks about, and he's so right about, a lot of people don't pay attention and they're not politically attuned, but they go to movies, and they watch football, and they watch TV. We put actors and athletes on this pedestal, of course, that they don't deserve, but they have paid a heavy price. They really have. Look at what's happened in the NFL. The NFL, where players are not disciplined in any way, shape, or form for the awful, dreadful, disrespectful taking a knee during the Star-Spangled Banner, which is absolutely an anti-American, anti-flag, anti-military, and anti-law enforcement action. Well, the NFL's ratings are plummeting. Their ratings are down. Their revenue is down. Michael and I are and that's good. That's a good story. There is hope. There are consequences for this stuff, and I know it doesn't feel like it some days. You feel like there's never going to be accountability, but there is. The NFL's a good example. The Grammy Awards, a lot of nonstop political bashing and Trump hating and all the nonsense, the resistance. It was one of the lowest rated Grammy Awards in history. They were down 24% year to date in terms of audience. Michael and I would be in trouble if we were down 24%. We're not. We grow and we grow. So there are consequences, and Craig mentioned Broadway, and I've gotten to invest in some Broadway productions, and I got to appear in a Broadway show, a musical called Memphis. So I watch theater and follow theater very closely in New York. That, as he called it, portly provocateur, Michael Moore, had a Broadway show. And it was the rage. It was all the rage. Oh, Michael Moore, he's going to be on stage bashing Donald Trump for 2 hours in New York City. This is going to be great. Got to share with you the very happy news. The show bombed. It absolutely bombed. It did. Even in New York City, this show bombed. It lost its investment. It didn't recoup. People didn't, and the kiss of death, back to it, was a terrible review in the New York Times, saying it was preachy and it was boring. It was kind of, he bombed. So there is accountability, and there is now a great reckoning. Smart, intellectual conservatives and Republicans have sort of been forced to give credit where credit is due, to look at the accomplishments on policy of the first year of the Trump administration. And because the truth of the matter is, a lot of really, really wise people were dead wrong. They know they were wrong, and it's tough to be wrong. Listen, we've all made mistakes, and we've all been there where we wish we could take it back. Michael and I have a great friend and colleague named Dennis Prager, and Dennis is, like Michael, one of my heroes. And Dennis, who is as warm and as funny and as smart as you think he is, was quoted over the weekend in Breitbart. They quoted his radio show on Thursday. Maybe you saw this. Prager said on air, "My opposition to Donald Trump was wrong. I was wrong." He said the only way to govern while advancing the principles of conservatism was to disregard left-wing and partisan Democrat agitation. And he said, I didn't understand my friends who supported Donald Trump. By the way, I immediately took credit for that and thought that was me. Dennis said, I said to them, are you not aware of what he said about John McCain? You know, doesn't that disqualify the guy? And he said to me that nevertheless, what they perceived about Trump, and I'll add what the Mike Gallaghers of the world perceived about Trump, was accurate. A man who doesn't give a damn what the press says about him. That's the only way to govern. The only way to govern. It's the only way to advance the principles of conservatism, he said, is for a president not to give a damn. He said Trump is so much better a president than Mitt Romney would have made, describing Romney as tepid and concerned with appealing to outlets like the New York Times rather than the American people. This is that reckoning. This is that reckoning. You can't ignore the policy achievements. A president who has the vision and the courage and the fortitude to declare what we already know and we've known forever, that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. You're going to tell me that's not conservatism? Are you going to tell me that a Republican Party under this president who fights for the lives of 5-month-old unborn babies isn't conservatives? You think there'd be any effort to fight for a 5-month-old unborn baby under President Hillary Clinton and Democrats? Are you kidding me? And Michael talked about crossing across the aisle. And this is one of the great challenges we face as Republicans. Yeah, there were 3 Democrats who voted with the Republicans, but there were 2 Republicans who voted with the Democrats. Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, both voted to disregard the life of this 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9-month-old baby who is feeling pain, who is smiling, who is recognizing voices. You know, some of these rhinos, these Republicans, are shameful, because they just ought to join the Democrat Party. They ran as Republicans in order to get elected, and they betrayed Republican and conservative values. And Susan Collins is a perfect example of that. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You know, there is a list of achievements and accomplishments of the first year of the Trump presidency that is as long as your arm. In fact, I was looking, 81 listed by the Washington Examiner last week, 81 policy achievements. But you can break them down into 9 areas, 9 crucial areas, and we know this, but sometimes it serves us well to be reminded of it. Judicial appointments, 74 federal judges, a whirlwind pace of conservative judges on the bench. I don't need to remind you about Neil Gorsuch. Of course, tax reform, which was a campaign promise fulfilled. This president, in fact, I was watching tonight, on TV before I came over here, they went back to Trump's first speech before the joint session. They didn't call it a State of the Union, they couldn't, but it was the speech to the joint session, and he said, we're going to have a massive tax reform plan that is going to be to the benefit of the American people. See, this guy is known as the billionaire's the blue-collar billionaire. The blue-collar billionaire who hardworking, everyday, hard-fought people can recognize and appreciate. 80% of Americans are going to see more money in their wallet this year. 80%. I'm not one of them, by the way, in a blue state, in a blue city, and I'm still thrilled because I'm blessed and I'm grateful for my life. But I'm so thankful again for the 80% of Americans who are going to see more money in their wallets thanks to tax reform. That was a campaign promise fulfilled. The individual mandate repeal from Obamacare, huge, huge. The deregulation that we've seen at a breathtaking pace, and of course, loosening the stranglehold on entrepreneurs and business owners. Again, these aren't things that we would even be in the universe of with Hillary Rodham Clinton. That's what we kept saying during the campaign. We kept saying, wait a minute, this is all going to happen. And I can't believe how it has. Cutting government waste. Less than 3 months into his presidency, Trump issued an executive order directing every federal agency to determine where money is being wasted and how services can be improved. This is the kind of stuff that we've seen. Of course, the travel ban, which was huge, defeating the Islamic State, driving them out of and crushing the Islamic State, ISIL. Of course, the recognition of Jerusalem and the withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accord agreement. Policy. That's what matters, not his tweets, not his personality. Listen, we get he's a bull in a china shop, but and as I said on the air many times, this is a guy who, if you cross him and he's mad at you, he's going to run you over with the bus, and then he's going to back over to make sure the job got done in the first place. It's no surprise. I mean, we knew it. We know it. We know that. But this is a guy with every tweet who is authentic and who fights for the American people. Boy, does he fight. And that's what the American people voted for. A fighter. A fighter. And I'm grateful for that battle. I mean, and I do. Once in a while, I'll get lulled into a sense of, well, maybe he shouldn't tweet so much. Maybe somebody should, and my phone lines explode. No, he needs to tweet. He's going to be inarticulate. He's going to be inartful. He's going to be that bull in a china shop. But you know what? He's not going through Don Lemon. He's not getting the Washington Post to vet and edit and alter his message. He's going right to the American people. And so many times, he's right. Do you remember the famous tweet or the infamous tweet about Obama wiretapping my phones in Trump Tower? And they thought he was nuts. They said, oh my gosh, this guy's so crazy. Who even says wiretap my phones anymore? Well, he's a little old school. He likes McDonald's. As do I. By the way, thank you, Bay Area, for having the Grand Big Mac, because I enjoyed it tonight. But this is the kind of fight that Americans are expecting, and it's okay to fight. It's all right to have that passion, that authenticity, that battle, and now we are at that reckoning moment. I've joked, and I joked on air this morning. If you listen to me, I've been kidding about appearing with Michael. And Michael came on my show very graciously a couple times during the campaign to make his case against Donald Trump. And I said to Michael, and I said on the air this morning, I said, now we're gonna probably have a cage match tonight. I think I can take him. I'm not sure, but maybe not. But this rift, this divisive attitude among conservatives has not been enjoyable for us. It has not been pleasurable. I take no comfort in it, because to me, the enemy is a radical leftist agenda that is threatening to derail this country, not my fellow conservatives, not my fellow Republicans, not my fellow radio hosts. It has pained me, it really has, and it hurt me, because I have deep respect for many of these people who and not necessarily even referring to Michael on this, but who branded themselves and are still proudly never Trumpers. Bill Kristol, never Trump. Just continuing to fight against what this president has accomplished. And it lets me down. I'm good friends with a guy, maybe you read Pete Wehner. Pete Wehner is a very spiritual guy, faith-filled guy. I love his faith. And he loathes this man. It's a personal, visceral emotion. And that, I think, is the key here. It's not about policy. It's not about objectivity. I'm the first to admit This guy, you know, this president ain't exactly going to rival Norman Vincent Peale for winning friends and influencing people. I know that. Of course we know that. But for these folks who on our side, I say our side, who it's deeply personal. I get it. There's something about them that just crawls up under their skin and stays there. But I pray and I pray for the good of our country that they can open their hearts and their minds and recognize that there are millions and millions of Americans who are hoping this guy succeeds. You know, I didn't agree. There was a famous radio host who Michael alluded to who won, and we all owe our jobs, frankly, to Rush. But he got a lot of flack for talking about not wanting Obama to succeed. And we understood what he meant and why he said it, and I'm not questioning him or disagreeing with him, but I remember thinking, yikes, you know, even a liberal Democrat president, if he succeeds, there's going to be American success. Well, that's, of course, where we are now. If Donald Trump succeeds, hardworking Americans are going to succeed. And certainly those of us in this room know what success looks like, and we're feeling it. We're getting it every day, despite the bloodshed in the media. And the media, of course, it is a bloodbath. Man, I was watching Don Lemon the other night just try to eviscerate, and kind of did, Franklin Graham, Billy Graham's son. And Franklin Graham, you know, the latest mantra from the media, particularly CNN, has been, how can evangelical Christians support this guy? And he said to Franklin Graham, Don Lemon, who, you know, this guy has, I mean, it's fun to watch sometimes. I peek in on CNN and MSNBC, and it's a blood sport. Because these guys, they cry, they weep, they're screaming, they're pulling their hair out. I mean, honest to goodness, some of them I think are having complete nervous breakdowns on camera. I really expect some of them, I'm watching them, I think they're going to fall over. I mean, they're going to slump right over the desk. And I am proud for the years I've spent as a Fox News contributor, because I know that every time I've been I go and invite on a show, I'm going to debate a liberal. I mean, and it's going to be pretty, I mean, we've really tried. I mean, I know Fox has a reputation as a conservative network, fair and balanced. Well, fair and balanced to Fox News is to have like 9 talking heads on a panel. 8 of them hate Trump. 1 is mildly pro-Trump, and as soon as him or her says anything mildly supportive, all 8 of them, including the host, all start screaming at him. It's the craziest thing. I mean, it's honestly, that's what really is passing for television at CNN. And incidentally, I can report very happily, they're getting their clocks cleaned in the ratings. CNN's getting clobbered. They're getting killed. It is a Fox News and an MSNBC battle in the cable news wars right now. It's been kind of a fascinating thing to watch. And back to the Don Lemon thing for just a moment, when he was grilling and attacking Franklin Graham, he said, how could you evangelical Christians go after Bill Clinton for his personal behavior the way you did, and you turned a blind eye to Donald Trump? And I was screaming at the TV, Dr. Graham, why don't you say to Don Lemon, why were you liberals utterly silent during Bill Clinton's personal behavior, but now all of a sudden you're on your moral high horse and you're going to be the moral judge of Donald Trump? That sword cuts both ways. So, you know, I get frustrated, I get exuberant though, because I do remember, as Michael talked about, that hidden hand. And I like talking about the power of prayer, because longtime listeners to my show know that in June of 2008, I lost my Denise, my wife, to endometrial cancer. And it didn't make sense. She died the day before her 52nd birthday. We have 4 boys, just a bewildered husband who was trying to maintain a radio show, and it was just awful. But as I look back at that period of time, I remember when she was diagnosed. And I said, sweetie, I don't have to talk about this on the air. This is a very, as Michael knows, a cancer battle is a very, very personal thing. And I just don't have to mention it. She said, no, talk about it. Talk about it on air, because maybe we can inspire people who are going through a similar battle that they can go through it too. And she was, you know, I was very forceful in that. So I did. So I shared the stories of chemo and trips to the doctor and all that with our audience. And an amazing thing happened. Even though she lost her battle with cancer, she was incredibly strong. She never had any pain, ever. And I remember looking back at that, and Denise wasn't Wonder Woman. I mean, she was a beautiful love of my life, but she wasn't Superwoman. And I always remember looking back at that period of time and realizing the reason she did so well, the reason she really never cried and wasn't afraid and was so strong, was because millions of people who listened to me on the radio and knew what was going on were praying for her. You see, prayer works. Prayer does work, and I know it works. I know it works. Because I watched her persevere, and I watched her in her own way beat this thing without pain and without fear, and it was because so many people were lifting her up. And the most prominent example for me is the guy sitting here. Because, he doesn't spend a lot of time talking about it, but Michael faced a difficult cancer. Imagine cancer here when you talk on the radio. And Michael's an amazing guy because I know him so well, and he makes all of us look bad because he never takes time off. So I knew that when he was diagnosed, I thought, oh my gosh, he's going to be way more worried about missing work than he is getting through cancer. Because he never misses work. I mean, this guy works, and it makes me crazy because not only does he never take time off work, but he agrees to fly coach. Which makes all of us look bad because us divas who want to sit in the front, have to contend with the boss saying, well, Michael Medved flies coach. Why can't you? But you know what Michael Medved did with cancer? And he talked about, of course, the medical technology and all the health care that he had, but he also had something else. He had something way more important than the medical breakthroughs. He had the power of prayer. He had so many people pulling for him. I remember praying without ceasing for him. I remember telling my listeners, pray without ceasing for this guy. He's a good guy, and we need him. We need his voice. And we need him more than ever. And you know what? He beat that thing, and he beat it because of the power of prayer. It works. So, as you look at this miracle, this living, breathing, exuberant, boisterous example of the miracle of prayer, I want you to try to remember that the prayer works when we pray for our country, because this is a time where we do need it. I want to pray for every single leader, and yep, I pray for Democrats, I pray for Republicans, I pray for constipation-faced Nancy Pelosi, I pray for Bernie Sanders, I pray for all of them. I pray for Michael Moore. Sorry he bombed on Broadway, but I pray for him. And I pray for this president, because he listen, I've gotten to go to the White House a couple times in the last few months, and to spend some time with him one-on-one. When Dennis talks about him not giving a damn, he does not. He does not give two craps about what the media is doing. He doesn't care what the Democrats are doing. He does not care. They can't keep up with him in the White House. They got 23-year-old kids exhausted chasing him around. He's on the phone at 1 in to people. I mean, it's unbelievable. But he needs that hidden hand. I worry about every aspect about keeping him safe, keeping him strong, and keeping him determined to fight for what's right for the American people. And so, and yeah, it's okay. Maybe pray that he modulates the tweets a little bit, but that's okay. Pray that he has the wisdom, the strength, and the righteousness to do what's right for this country. I have the optimism that he will. When I come to the Bay Area and I see a room full of smiling people like this, I know we're on the right track. I am honored to be I hope you can wake up with me on 8:60 a.m. The Answer every morning. Thanks for being here tonight. God bless the area, and God bless America. Thank you very much.
Let's first begin with a question for Michael Medved. Does the United States have a culture of fear to which the media caters to?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a media culture. And the problem in the United States of America is not just the low quality of media. It's above all the high quantity that we consume. And this is something that people in this room can do something about. In other words, one of the studies, I did a book years ago called Hollywood versus America. And the theme of that book was, again, that the problem with media and the impact of media is based upon our decisions. Not the decisions of network executives, not the decisions of movie producers. It's the decisions of what people watch and how you choose to invest your time. It is very typical for the average person to know people on TV better than you know your neighbors. And that's particularly true in big cities. That's one of the advantages people do have out there in the country, in the flyover country that conservatives talk about all the time, is people actually do get to know their neighbors. And the one thing that you can do, and frankly it'll make you feel better, and it probably will help the country, is give the TV a rest. This is one of the reasons, and I'll tell you, this is just a little side plug. I'm a Sabbath observer. And that means that on Friday night, when the Sabbath comes in, no TV. We don't own a TV anyway. No radio. That's a real sacrifice. And 25 hours where you actually talk to real people. Real people. Neighbors. And you walk. And you don't get involved in the shadow world of mass media that engulfs us all.
Next question. All right, thank you, Michael. Question from Mike Gallagher. So, Mike, are you saying that pro-choice people shouldn't be Republicans? That's an awful lot of voters.
Oh.
I'm sorry. Say it again. Should pro-choice?
So the question is, the questioner here is saying, are you saying that pro-choice people shouldn't be Republicans?
Listen, people should be whatever political party they feel affiliated with. I believe that life transcends politics. Life transcends whether you are a registered Democrat, whether you're a registered Republican, whether you're an independent. We have discarded life, you know, and we know it. I mean, it's shocking to me, and I hate to keep coming back to this vote. 51 to 46, that means 46 politicians, including senators, including a pair of Republicans, think it's perfectly okay to terminate the life of a 5 or 6 month old baby. And that's not okay. But we are immune and we're numb to the sanctity of life. We watch it, we see it in Hollywood, the way life is so casually discarded, and the violence, the epic violence that we see. We see it on the internet. We see it in these awful mass shootings that we've witnessed. You know, the young people just are obsessed with, I mean, this week they made an arrest of a young woman who was going to blow up a high school because she wanted to be the first female school killer. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that, I mean, there are so many issues that to me I'm a registered Republican, but I was married to a Democrat. I have Democrat friends. I work in theater. Got a lot of people who are not like-minded at all with me politically, but the life issue should transcend political divisiveness and political choices that we have to make. This year, when 80% of Americans get more money in their take-home pay, it's not going to differentiate between who's a Republican and who's a Democrat. You know, it's not going to matter when $1,000 bonuses and $2,000 bonuses are handed out. No one cares if it's a Democrat or a Republican, getting that bonus. And so, no, I don't. I think the life issue transcends political persuasions.
Yes, please, Michael.
Yeah, this is one of those issues where I very respectfully disagree with my friend very intensely. Not on the importance of the life issue. We agree on that completely, and both of us for reasons that Mike explained with his very gallant fight beside his beloved Denise. Nothing teaches you the value of life as much as facing death. What I disagree with him about is he said something that frankly I think you'll come to regret, which is you said that you wished that Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, who voted wrong, and they did, shamefully, on this particular bill, that they would leave the Republican Party. Hey, if they leave the Republican Party, guess what? We've got a new majority leader named Chuck Schumer. And then this bill doesn't even come to a vote. Because the fact is, we have two parties that are very different on this issue. The Republican Party is overwhelmingly and passionately pro-life for nearly every Republican in both houses of Congress. The Democratic Party is not. And it is very, very important that we maintain those committee chairmanships, and that's why when it comes to the committee chairmanships and the control of the agenda, what they actually get to vote on, President Trump would experience. Right now, we have a heck of a fight coming up in 2018. And there are some Republican candidates and there are some Republican incumbents who are not great. I admit it. But you know what? If President Trump is going to get anything done in the second half of his first term, it's going to require Republicans continuing to elect Speaker Paul Ryan and, yes, Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, because otherwise this entire country is going to be engulfed in one investigation after another, one cheap shot attack after another, one kind of investigation. They're going to investigate the entire Trump family. They're going to investigate Barron, right?
Yeah.
And it will be a very ugly scene. So no, I do not want Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski to leave the Republican Party. We need them.
Allow me to respond. Because this is a point that Michael and I do very strongly disagree about. And this is a battle that sometimes we have among conservatives. Frankly, if a Republican, an elected Republican, constantly caucuses with Democrats, what good are they? So let me clarify. When I say they should leave the Republican Party, because let's face it, I mean, we watched John McCain, God bless him, in his battle, wave his thumbs down and reject the repeal and replacement of Obamacare. That's a Republican senator who shamed the Republican Party for that with that vote. I'm sorry. And if Republicans like John McCain and like Susan Collins continue to vote with the Democrats, let me clarify, Michael, so there's a lot, just clarity here. I want them to leave and be replaced by real Republicans. I want voters to elect Republicans who act like Republicans, not like Democrats. So yeah, we will agree to disagree. But isn't it great to see that we can disagree and do it civilly?
And by the way, each of those three people he named, John McCain, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, were crucial votes. Without all three of them, we don't have tax reform. And they all voted right.
All right, here's another question for Michael Medved. Michael, grab the microphone there if you would. The questioner here is, how can we reverse California's decline into liberalism? Boy. And we have to be out of here by midnight.
Listen, I will tell you the one thing that is fascinating in California and that is going to be a real challenge for you is to see if you even have a non-Democrat in the general election this year. Because you now have, as we have in Washington State where I live, you have the jungle primary, which means that the top two vote getters in the primary end up on the general election ballot. Now, if you end up having a choice for governor between Villaraigosa and Gavin Newsom, at least Tom Steyer isn't running. I mean, here is just a little quick thought. I think the next non-Democrat to win in California, and it could be this year, is going to be someone running as an independent. And with the jungle primary, unfortunately, all these years of Democratic rule, and thank goodness there are term limits. Otherwise, Governor Brown would serve to 140. I mean, he would be there forever. Given all the years of Democratic rule, if someone they're serious people. If someone from the world of celebrity, like Ronald Reagan, and like, dare I say it, the last Republican to win in California, his name was Schwarzenegger. If someone better qualified to be governor than Schwarzenegger, maybe not as well qualified as President Reagan was, Governor Reagan was, were to run as an independent, that is a real chance. And by the way, they can win a Senate seat as well. It's going to be fascinating to watch all of the Democrats attacking Dianne Feinstein, who's on the ballot, even though she's 140 years old already. She's 85. Really. The attacks on her are going to be fun to watch, but unfortunately they're almost all from the left.
All right.
Let me add a quick chapter about liberalism in California as a New Yorker. The other night at the CVS, when I went to get some stuff, the guy looked at me and he snarled, "Do you want a bag?" And of course, when I said yes, he acted like I threatened to rip his kidney out. And yet, I mean, y'all are so worried, and they're worried so much about the environment and Governor Moonbeam and no bags and no plastic and all of that, and yet I had to literally crawl over 9 homeless people with filth and trash piled up, and I'm a compassionate conservative. I don't like seeing people in the street, but yet that's liberalism in California. We're going to be way more worried about whether or not you have the audacity. And I wanted to say to the guy, yeah, I want to take all the 9 items that I bought and balance it on my shoulders to go to the hotel. Of course I want a bag, you dummy. But instead I took the bag, yes please. But that's liberalism in California. You know, you're worried about bags, but disregard the dirt, the filth, and in the streets, the trash, and the poor, unfortunate souls who are laying there with their dogs and panhandling. That's a lack of priorities. Right
Mike,
there.
stay at the podium, because while we're on the topic of crazy Californians, this listener writes, Mike, should the threats of California seceding from the Union be taken seriously?
Well, I got to resist the stereotypes, because I often say, yes, please, go away. But my visit here has, and this is, I haven't spent a lot of time in the Bay Area. You have some beautiful, beautiful people. You got well-meaning people. You got misguided people. But I've got to remember not to stereotypically dismiss California, because after the welcome that we've gotten tonight and the stay that I've had, and Mike Shields and his team at 860 AM The Answer, I'll think twice before I make one of those stereotypical jokes about California, you know, seceding and going away, because you ain't going anywhere.
All right. All right, next question for Mr. Medved. What benefit does it give the media to keep us polarized, and what can we do to fight it?
The benefit is ratings. As I mentioned, the people, among the people who are the minority who actually care about politics, are a lot of true believers who are very committed conservatives or very committed on the left. And that's who is watching by and large. And the other thing is, it's like wrestling. I mean, and there really is an aspect of pro wrestling to our politics right now. I grew up, I was raised largely by my grandmother and her sister, my Aunt Irene, in Philadelphia. And this is on the days of old black and white TV, when they had little TVs. When I was a little kid, I remember my grandmother and her sister used to do netzes. They would do piecework, doing little hair nets that they would do on a table, and they would watch wrestling like all day. And this is Philadelphia, and wrestling was on all the time. And I don't know, it kept them entertained. They were both German-born, and they were, and this was what they loved. And again, I think that if you see what our politics really has become, it's a lot of locker room talk from professional wrestling. And the media, that works. And what Mike was saying before about CNN losing in competition with MSNBC and Fox is absolutely true. However, CNN has done very well over the last several years. Trump has been a huge gift to political media because people watch. And they didn't broadcast Trump's rallies from beginning to end and focus on him. Trump got more than 3 times the coverage from all his 17 primary opponents combined, because it was exciting to people. And that's what drives the media to keep us polarized.
All right, question now for Mike Gallagher. Here's a good one, Mike. Do we need term limits for Congress?
You know, most people say yes, and I tend to agree. I remember an old politician from South Carolina where I used to work, Fritz Hollings, who said, Mike Gallagher, every election's a term limit. And I got that. That's sort of the old school. But yeah, this is, listen, President Trump has broken the whole mold of what it means to be a traditional politician. You know, and all the rules are broken. We're living through an incredibly historic period of time. Sometimes I don't think we even recognize how 100 years from now, they're not going to believe it. I mean, they're going to say, what? He beat how many primary candidates, great candidates, and how many hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars did they spend? And this guy, but you know what he does better than anybody? You know, Michael jokes about Ben Carson at a rally or Carly Fiorina. Can you imagine President Jeb Bush inspiring passion? You know, and he was the front runner. He was the favorite. You think he would have realistically, would he have beat Hillary Clinton? No, there really wasn't. One of the things about this improbable, you know, unlikely, crazy chapter we're in is I don't believe that any of those Republican nominees would have beat the machine that was behind Hillary Clinton. She had it all. She had the media. She had all of it. She had everything behind her. She just forgot to go to Florida and Wisconsin. You know.
All right, another question now for Michael Medved. Michael, many of us were astonished last Thursday to hear you diminish the revelations of Representatives Nunes and Jordan et al., talking about discovering some of the FBI's upper administration's subversive behavior. Please tell us more.
Yeah, I am sick of the whole Russian investigation, both the investigation itself and the pushback. And you know what? I think President Trump is sick of it too. I mean, I really do. And every moment, every brain cell we spend on either side of this Russian investigation thing is a moment we're not spending building infrastructure. It's a moment we're not spending making a meaningful deal on immigration, which the president is fighting for, which can make a difference for American lives and make a difference for the future of the Republican Party. I mean, honest to goodness, I am very, very confident that the president was not engaged in collusion with the Russians. Now, some people have already pleaded guilty. They've been indicted. I am also very confident that there was arrogance. I talked today about it with Victor Davis Hanson on the air. There are people clearly who were arrogant and assuming Hillary would win in the FBI and trying to curry favor with her. And most of those people are gone. Peter Strzok was deserved to be taken off the investigation. And by the way, those of you, I bet we have some people here who've served our country in the military. Do we have any veterans here? Okay, thank you for your service, and thank God. You know that the Uniform Code of Military Conduct means that if you're an officer and you are involved and you're married to somebody and you're involved with somebody else who's married, which was the situation with Lisa Page and Peter Strzok, that's a violation. And the idea that on top of everything else that they did to show bias, they clearly should be disciplined and have no future in the FBI. But for people with a national platform to be involved with this soap opera, it's like Peyton Place at the FBI, is pathetic. And frankly, I am very, very sure that President Trump would have preferred that Representative Nunes, who I know is a Californian and all that, and it's an endangered species to have conservatives from California, but really to release this memo on the same day as the State of the Union, I don't think it was right or useful to upstage the president.
All right, let's get Mike Gallagher's comment in here too, please, Mike.
Yeah. You might suspect I have a bit of a disagreement with Mr. Medved on this as well, because frankly, as a layman, I think the politicization of the Justice Department is dreadful. It is shameful. Michael is right about the FBI, but by golly, this could be one of the biggest backfires in history. An investigation into stupid, Michael said, I think President Trump would like it to go away. He'd give anything to have it go away. Of course he wants it to go away. He doesn't want this. It is a distraction, but by golly, bring it on, because something I believe big is looming. I mean, when you see the way McCabe, after the FBI director saw the memo as reported by the New York Times, and suddenly this guy is out immediately, something is rotten in Denmark, and Americans deserve, I don't think, to avoid, there's a lot of lot of politicians who wish that we would look the other way on this entire politicization of the FBI, of the Justice Department. If indeed people were spied on illegally in order to stop Donald Trump at all costs, I'm sorry. Yes, we want infrastructure repair, but that's a very big deal, and we ought to get to the bottom of it.
All right, we've got time for just a couple of more questions for our guests. Let's go back to Michael Medved. Michael, first a quick softball for you. Whatever happened to your co-host on Sneak Previews, Rex Reed?
Rex Reed, thank God, was never my co-host. He was a host of At the Movies. Rex, to the very best of my knowledge, is living in his apartment with his cats in New York City, and I think is still a film critic for the New York Observer. My co-host on Sneak Previews was Jeffrey Lyons. And I just spoke to Jeffrey. I speak to him on the air from time to time. Jeffrey is one of those guys who is a classic New York liberal, and not a radical. He's an old line kind of New York liberal, but with all of the ridiculous positions that implies. And he's still a good guy and a wonderful individual. And that's one of the things, I did want to add this because I think it's very important. I began by talking about my resistance to the idea that we're in a war, that it's the second Civil War. The reason I think that is so destructive, that analogy, is because the goal of warfare is to destroy your enemy. It's to kill your enemy and smash his stuff. That's the way you win wars. The way you win politics is not by killing anybody or destroying anybody. It's by persuading as many people as you can. And usually the way to do that is to concentrate on why your ideas are going to be better for the country. And the fact is that I do not see my fellow Republicans ever as my enemy. But you know what? I don't see Democrats as the enemy. They're deluded. They're wrong-headed. They are extremely misguided in their values for America, but many of them are patriots. Many of them are people who have served our country in the military. They're people who basically are like you and me, and as Mike Gallagher said, we all have a stake in praying for the success of this country, and that means praying for the success of this president and our other leaders.
All right, before you leave, Michael, one last softball question for you. You've been labeled at one time as a never-Trumper.
Never. I never accepted that label. I've always said I was a never-Trumper. Because one thing in politics is the word never is a bad word. I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. And if you write an addendum to the American Miracle, do you think President Trump might find a place in a new chapter?
I hope so. But look, I do think that the same way that folks who said that, oh my God, Trump has been elected, it's the end of the world is falling, the market is going to collapse, things are going to be terrible, get into your bomb shelters. I mean, that's silly now. It was way, way premature. But I think also people who are declaring President Trump the greatest of our presidents, that's also premature. It is. He had a very successful end of the first year. He had some rocky times in the first 6 months. The end of the year was a great success, and what the president has to be able to do is to learn from his mistakes, because the idea that President Trump never makes mistakes is ridiculous. Ronald Reagan made mistakes, and Ronald Reagan was the greatest president of my lifetime. And again, the idea and I think it's so necessary to make these fights, these political discussions, these arguments, these quarrels, and yes, these battles, if you will, back and forth, not a war, to have all of this about what matters to the American people, not about personality. If there is one thing that I think needs to change in the Trump administration, it's not all about for or against one man, as important as he is. Because frankly, if it's about personality, it's going to be very, very hard to compromise. You either like him or you don't. You either love him or you hate him. No, it's not that. It's what's good for America. I think the tax cut was enormously good for America. I'm very glad it passed. His judicial appointments have been very good for America. Certainly the deregulation has been good for America. But there are other aspects where if we talk about what's good for America, it doesn't necessarily mean saying that either I love or loathe his personality. And in that context, is it possible that in years to come, we'll look back on this and say, wow, this was the hand of God that made this amazing victory happen and gave us a president who has helped to save our country? I think that could happen. It could happen. But you know what? I'll conclude here with a biblical citation. And it's from the book of Exodus. And it's in Exodus 33. And all of a sudden, Moses wants to see God. They've been bickering back and forth, Moses and God. And Moses says, can I see your face? And God says, no man can see my face. And he takes Moses and puts him in a cleft in the rock and says, you can look upon my back. And he sees God's back as he passes. And the way that the rabbis understand that passage is we cannot see God's hand in history. We can't see his face. We can't see it as it's happening. In retrospect, you can. You can see his back passing. Otto von Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor of Prussia, said it as well as anyone ever has. He said it is the job of the statesman to listen for God's footsteps in history, than to grab hold of his coattails and hang on. My prayer is that President Trump hears the footsteps and hangs on.
Very good. Well put. Mike Gallagher.
As you might suspect, have a bit of a disagreement. Because there is a war, and it's a cultural war. We know what a cultural war looks like. We know what it sounds like. We know what it feels like. We know what it means to fight for our values that are being shredded daily by the left, by an antagonistic, awful, sometimes evil enemy. There is good versus evil. There is good and evil in this world, and that's a war. That doesn't mean that I want to kill the enemy. I want to win on the war of ideas. And I want to win on the war of our values. And there is a war. We know it's a war. We know it's there's spiritual warfare in this country. Michael, of course, quotes Exodus. That's a rich spiritual reminder that we are a Judeo-Christian nation. And there are people who want to tear that apart. There are people who want to quash that. There are people who want to destroy it. I believe there are people who want to destroy America. And they're right, the enemy is right here within. And so, again, I don't think we have to say, well, let's all grab hands and sing Kumbaya now, and let's all just have a battle, not a war, whatever you want to call it. I mean, we have to win, or we are gonna lose the country. We are gonna lose what this country was founded on. We are gonna lose the Bible. We are gonna lose the ability to pray in the public square. Those are very real spiritual warfare battles. And I have to say, and I don't mean this because again, Michael and I are friends, we disagree. You wouldn't know from hearing tonight, and I'm grateful that there's been a bit of a reckoning. Michael fought against Donald Trump, hard. He fought hard, and you know, there were lots of smart, intellectual, great conservatives who fought tooth and nail to have him lose. And you don't know it now because that reckoning has occurred where people are having to acknowledge, oh, well, it's the second 6 months, the first, baloney. From day one, this guy was fighting to fulfill his campaign promises, and they threw everything at him. They continue to throw everything at him. And so we can't rewrite history. I'm grateful for people who have come around. I am grateful for people who have accepted the inevitable success of the first year. I don't care if it's the first 6 months or the second 6 months. We have tax reform. We have this list of policy accomplishments that any conservative should be proud of. And every conservative should have fought for this guy with the same intensity that the left and others fought against him. I mean, we've got to stop battling, and maybe those who were, and not Michael, if he says wasn't never Trump, never Trump, whatever people were, maybe that will fade from our memory, and perhaps it should. because there is a battle that we ought to engage together as conservatives and together as Republicans, and that's against the activist far-left agenda that threatens to derail everything that this great country stands for, and we ought to fight for that. This country is worth fighting for, and it's a war worth winning.
Amen. Amen. All right, just before I turn it back over to Joel, let me answer the final question for both of them. They want to know, where do you both broadcast from, and will you be on the air tomorrow? And the answer is that Michael Medved broadcasts from the San Francisco of the Pacific Northwest, Seattle, where it rains occasionally, I understand. And we've also got Mike Gallagher, who's from the other left coast, who broadcasts from New York City. And of course, you can get up in the morning at 6 a.m. bright and early with Mike Gallagher, and then enjoy lunch at 12 noon with Michael Medved. The final question, have you enjoyed it tonight? Let's give Mike Medved and Mike Gallagher a nice round of applause. Joel?
All right, I'm not going to keep you any longer. Let's thank these fellows for their time. Thanks so much.